Welcome to the Future of Internal Communication podcast. I'm Jen Sproul, CEO of the Institute of Internal Communication. Since we launched this series in 2021, the world of work has been disrupted by event after event. A pandemic, geopolitics, AI, extreme weather events, remote and hybrid working, generational shifts, inclusion, diversity. The entire nature of how we work needs transformation. This podcast explores opportunities for internal communication in the future of work. Internal comms is a critical function that helps organisations achieve lasting change, building trust and relationship between people in pursuit of shared goals. Please join me, Dominic Walters, and Kat Barnard as we dissect what this means for internal communication. With relentless change the new normal, it's time to reimagine our profession.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Future of Internal Communication podcast. I'm joined as ever by Jen Sproul. Unfortunately, Dominic Walters can't be with us today. I have to say his loss, because we have one of the best guests joining us today to talk about his new book. Today, we are going to be exploring the future of leadership communication with Professor John Amaechi. John is a world-renowned organisational psychologist, best-selling author, and Professor of Leadership at the University of Exeter Business School. As the founder of APS Intelligence, John leads a global team that transforms leaders and cultures by combining cutting-edge behavioural science with psychological insight. His bespoke programmes aren't about quick fixes, but they do drive sustainable growth, ethical leadership, and organisational well-being. He advises to FTSE 100 boards. He is a LinkedIn top voice, and if anybody has not seen his reels on LinkedIn, they absolutely have to follow him, because on almost every day he speaks truth to power in some amazing form. And he's also the recipient of the Sport Industry Integrity and Impact Award. He's recognised as one of the most influential voices in leadership and organisational culture. And his best-selling book, again, fangirl here, The Promises of Giants, inspires leaders worldwide to embrace authenticity, drive ethical change, and create lasting legacies. As you know, because you listen to this podcast, I read a lot of books, and The Promises of Giants does not disappoint, so add it to your list. However, all of that to say, we're not here to talk about The Promises of Giants. We're here to talk about John's new book, It's Not Magic, and more specifically to discuss his thoughts about the future of leadership communication. So without further ado, John, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Jen. A pleasure.
Honestly, I read It's Not Magic and I felt it was one of those instances where I was handed a preview copy and I felt under some pressure to read it. And yet immediately I found myself nodding all the way through. As you know, this podcast is listened to by internal communicators around the globe, and it's also listened to by HR professionals and coaches, we have discovered. Fundamentally, our audience is anybody working in the people space or anybody who is interested in the way we use speech, language and communication to raise levels of performance at work. So I wanted to kick off nerdy because I noted a couple of quotes from the book that really caught my eye, and I just want to note these for listeners, and hopefully then listeners will be attracted to read the book. You have written, "Effective communication is the act of intentionally creating meaning for others." Wow. Then you wrote, "It's the synthesis of what you mean to convey, the discipline and care with which you shape your words and presentation, and a deep empathy for how this combination may land differently with different people in different contexts." And I just wanted to part those couple of sentences there because I think that just tees up the conversation that we're going to have today wonderfully. So if I may, please can I kick off by asking you, what is the premise of It's Not Magic? What had you been noticing that led you to write it?
So thank you for that. I was basking in the glow of those quotes for a second. I have goldfish memory, and I read stuff and I'm like, oh, that's amazing. It's like, oh, I wrote that. So
Brilliant.
I was enjoying it very much. So the book came about because I was starting to find that people around me, some of them were coaching clients, some of them were teams of executives that I was working with, were starting to use my apparent polished skills at certain things as an excuse. They were saying, well, of course you can do that. I diffuse a particularly nasty conflict. And well, of course you can do that. As if my psychology accreditations or some combination of other things about me that are innate somehow were the difference maker. And I was like, this is really dangerous. I knew it was wrong because it appealed to me so greatly. Right? The idea that I am somehow this amazing, born, sprouted from the womb as an amazing, complete and finished product, it really appealed to me, which instantly means it's wrong and a lie. And then I also noticed some of my colleagues were also doing this kind of, well, we can't be expected to have that kind of impact. We can't be expected to deliver in this kind of magnitude in this way because you're you. And again, it's quite flattering, but also very wrong. And I knew it was wrong. So I talked to a colleague of mine at the University of Exeter, Michelle Madden, and she's unbelievably sharp, not just academically clever, but can apply it in the real world. And she followed me around and watched me do my thing, coaching, teaching, group coaching, conflict resolution, speeches, teaching in the classroom. And she came back with results I did not want. I was hoping that there would be like 2% of me that was a bit magic, and apparently not. Apparently 100% of me is very ordinary stuff and often in not very interesting combination, but it delivers the results that we're looking for. And that's what I wanted for people. I wanted leaders who are already leaders to realize no excuses. You can learn this stuff if you're willing to put in some effort. And this isn't overwhelming effort, some effort that should be demanded of all leaders, and do it consistently. You can have these impacts. And then for those people who aren't yet leaders, who are told that they're small, told that they're unimportant, told that they don't have what it takes, just to know that there are some very simple skills here that you can adopt, learn, and use consistently to have what it takes.
I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff there that lends itself absolutely to a very, very, very important conversation that I think we can't have enough of at the moment. And the question that really is burning for me that I want to ask at this point in our current national and international trajectory, what defines good leadership, John?
Leadership is a promise of a kind of experience in its most basic level. That's what it is. It's a promise of a kind of experience. It is not a promise that everything will be easy or that life or work will be simple. It's not a promise that you will skip from one level to the next without effort or diligence. But it is a promise that if you follow the rules and expectations that are set out for you, that regardless of your demographics or background, you will progress and that you will be safe as much as is in control of the leader. So it's this combination of things. And I would point out to you right now that anybody who thinks that I'm a warm and fuzzy psychologist does not know who I am. I want to win. I want to win. I want to kick ass, right, in a contextually appropriate way. But I want to win. And so when I say this isn't, anybody who works with me knows I'm incredibly robust. I'm incredibly demanding. I have very high expectations, but they're explicit. And if you do those things, and if you make those efforts and you're diligent, I will reward you. And I don't just mean remuneratively, but in my attention, in my engagement with you, in my desire for you to accelerate, even if that means you leaving, right? Because that's part of the job too. So that's what leadership is. And if you look around at the companies and organizations of the people who listen and watch this podcast, the thing we have to recognize is those promises are explicit. You go onto the websites and actually as communicators, we're often responsible for disseminating those promises. Check out the careers page you just updated and how it talks about the leaders in this organization and how they care about you as a person and how they're interested in you developing your career. These aren't just statements, they're promises that have implications. If you say that you're interested in developing my career, there's an implication for me as a leader that I have time to do that with the time that I have, I care to use it. With the time that I care to use, I've developed the skills to be the kind of mentor / sponsor / coach that's required to help you develop as a person. And that I'm ethically minded. So when you develop to a point where you're really convenient and good for me, but you really, for you, should leave and go somewhere else, I make the right decision. It's a lot, right? From one sentence. Any of us who write, think about the number of sentences we've written and the number of promises contained. So that's what that leadership part is. Doing what we said we'd do, delivering as we said we'd deliver.
Which sometimes / often feels like a world away from the types and styles of leadership that I think we are all now exposed to 24/7, 365. And my brain is immediately going to some of the examples, because they're most in our face, some of the examples of political leadership that I imagine we all feel just overwhelmed by, because it in many corners it's nothing short of toxic. And until we set our stall out and say this is what leadership is, without that clear definition of what we believe leadership to be, we are easily influenced into thinking that it's something else because it hasn't been expressly, intentionally set out for us, right?
If I were to be slightly less generous than that,
go for it.
I would say that we all know what good contemporary leadership looks like and the components of it. But we're also aware that it is far more energy expensive. It requires more of us in terms of our self-regulation. It requires more of us in terms of our extension of ourselves to our colleagues, because we know that modern leadership isn't transactional. Right? We do know that, because your websites, all the people listening, watching, your websites are littered with words that make it clear that the relationship between the company and the individuals, between the managers and the individuals and the employees, is not transactional. So we know it. It's just that we know that those are the words we have to say to get people to come to us. But we know that getting people to deliver on those words means thinking about utilization targets, thinking about resourcing, thinking about skilling our leaders, especially our early stage leaders. And we don't really want to do that as much. We've done research with people, with very senior leaders, asking them what was important for leadership, what was deemed important for leadership in the past versus now. These are some of the words that these leaders said were important back in the day: charisma, confidence, experience. Please notice the prominence of the word male. And when we asked people about it, by the way, this group was mostly men, because they're senior leaders, C-suite, which are mostly still men, partners, senior partners in businesses and law firms, mostly still men. And they're mostly old men like me. So charisma, confidence, experience, male. I just need to point out that most of these things have no relationship with performance. Charisma, utter bollocks, no relationship to performance whatsoever. Indeed, when you look in the literature, there are about 400 different definitions of the word charisma. And anytime there's 400 different definitions, you know it's nonsense. Experience, it's just not as valuable as people think in a world where everything is changing, where you don't know from day to day what the next important role is going to be, what the next technological advancement, what the next regulatory realignment will be, right? And so then I asked the same group of people at the same time, what about now? And I was very clear, because this was done just after COVID. This wasn't about COVID and how everybody said it changed everything, because it didn't. It accelerated some changes that were already occurring. And they said, what about now with VUCA, if we're still using that terminology? What about now with regulatory realignment? What about now with socio-political upheaval? The idea that there are literal wars going on that can incorporate some, if not on both sides, people who are in your organizations, supply chain, and so on and so on. What about now for leadership? And this is what this same group of mostly crusty, like myself, older men said: vision, empathy, emotional literacy, inclusion, integrity, authenticity. This is not a group of woke 20-year-olds coming off a college campus with flowers in their mouth. This is a group of leaders who realize that what it takes to both attract and develop and to keep people who are going to sustainably perform over time instead of costing you money by spending money to bring them in, having them leave or start to think about leaving after 3 months, having them actually leave after 9 months or 12 months because it looks better on their CV, but being really divorced from the company by 6 months in, they realize they need a difference. So this is what leadership is. And you can imagine even looking at those words, the way you communicate and talk to your people is radically different in the kind of charisma, confidence, experience world than it is in the vision, empathy, emotional literacy, flexibility, authenticity world.
It's a world apart, and it makes me wonder about the amount of time that is required to practice and develop the skills that are needed now in leadership, and how much time is proactively set aside to the development and honing of those skills when, to an earlier point that you made, it's actually oftentimes way easier to look at lines on a spreadsheet and think about quarterly shareholder returns.
Yeah.
Because developing these vital skills requires humility and courage and the willingness to not always be right. And those are kind of counterintuitive to many of the traits that we conceive of leadership up until now, where we think about command and control, we think about hierarchy, we think about status, we think about the earned right to be in the C-suite, wherever that even may be. And those two things, those old leadership and new leadership, they're kind of just juxtapositions, aren't they? And actually, when you first started describing leadership as you have defined it, I was immediately put in mind of followership. The fact that it doesn't matter whether you're leading a team of 20,000, 2,000, 220, or even just yourself. As Seth Godin said on a podcast of ours a couple of years ago, I think it was on this podcast, he said actually sometimes leadership is just the willingness to go first and to step in and to try and make that difference.
Yeah, I mean, this has been said by better people than me. There's a wonderful researcher called Barbara Kellerman. I don't know if you've had her or you've heard of her before, but she's brilliant, right? And she writes, and there's a quote from her, so I'll just quote it because it's really brilliant. In spite of the widespread disappointment in and distrust of leaders in society at large, and despite the seismic changes in culture and technology, there has been little change to the prevailing paradigm of learning how to lead, no significant attempt to reimagine the model or to adjust to an era in which leadership is less about refining the individual and more about reimagining the collective. And I just thought, that's so amazing, because she goes on to say that no thought is being given to instructing people on following, when following wisely and well is manifestly as important as leading wisely and well. How brilliant, right? And leaders, you have to embrace the excitement of being a novice again, because you can either embrace that excitement in a proactive way or have it kick you in the arse. This is those leaders, I'll never need to know anything about information technology or AI or information security. And it's like, yes, you will. It's a base level thing for you now. I don't really need to know anything about managing people's mental health. Yes, you do. And not because you want to become a counselor or you want to be kind and warm, because nobody's ever accused me of those two things, but because you want to win. And if you want to win, you recognize that people's mental health and maintaining it sensibly is a way of engaging sustainable high performance. You see it a lot with startups and scale-ups. They do really, really well, and then all of a sudden they're gone. And it's because there's this brain trust of people who are willing to really sacrifice. And then all of a sudden there's a physical and intellectual limit to that, and you just burn out to a crisp. If you want to win over 3 years, sure, be a jerk leader. If you want to win in the long term, that's a whole different mindset. And by the way, it's not magic. It's not rocket science. These are really simple things. And I always think it's intriguing to me how many of these skills leaders already have. They just choose not to deploy them with certain people. When they're nieces, I've met these ornery and kind of spiky 70-odd-year-old chairs of major companies. And they can't be bothered to deploy empathy for their colleagues. but then their niece or godchild calls them on the phone, and you watch how their voice modulates. Oh, love, how are you? Are you all right? It sounds really like you're really upset. And you can hear them doing all the things that they just can't be bothered to do for the person who's just learned that their pitch has failed.
Yeah.
You don't think that anybody notices that. They don't notice how you smile fondly at that picture of your nephew that's on your desk or on the wall by you. But for them, you can offer them nothing but scorn. It shows you that picture demonstrates that you have the skill.
Right.
You're simply saying that you, Kat, and you, Jen, are just not important enough for me to utilize it. Crazy.
It is one of those things, isn't it? I mean, it's been said of the younger generations entering the workforce for the first time that they call out inauthenticity. They expect congruence and transparency and people to be real because obviously digital natives, they've grown up with these tools that ideally encourage you to be real. Goodness, there's a platform, isn't there, called Be Real. That's what is expected. John, I wanted to dive into a chapter in your book because, again, it will be of great interest to our listeners, and it is on the art of perceptive listening. First of all, can I just say, I love that you have called it an art because I am a firm advocator for bringing the pendulum back into balance in business parlance and embracing art and science. I think we've gone way too far down the trajectory of business as a science, which is creating some of these frictions and difficulties that we're currently faced with. But in this chapter, you have introduced the concepts of sonic libertarianism and sonic stewardship. And I was so enthralled when I read these definitions and how you had described them. So please, can you tell our listeners what these are and why they are so important?
Yeah, I'm also kind of enamored by these two as well. I was in a log cabin in Oxford when I thought of these two things. I knew that talking about listening couldn't just be, and I'm not diminishing active listening techniques, right? But there's a macro to this, which is the environment in which one is expected to listen and indeed speak. So sonic libertarianism is the idea of a cultural or organizational state where, and by the way, as I say this should start to feel familiar to you, where people feel entitled to speak whenever and however they like, with no regard for its impact on other people. In this type of space is where the loudest and most persistent, relentless voices dominate, and contributions are often a performance rather than anything designed to engender real change or move a discussion forward. It is pantomime of the highest order, but it's corrosive adult pantomime. And it's framed often, the kind of negative, caustic way that people talk to each other is framed as freedom of speech. I can say whatever I want, even though it corrodes collaboration. And it clearly, and many people in workplaces will notice this, it silences more considered and more thoughtful voices, even if those voices are saying things that aren't entirely correct. But this is an environment that allows poor quality ideas to thrive, right? Whether you're talking about anti-science views or views that are simply not correct and are just stereotype. Sonic stewardship, on the other hand, and again, please don't mistake me for one of these warm and fuzzy people. I'm not. That is a mistake. I want to win. Sonic stewardship is this idea that you curate what you say. You actively curate what you say. You actively think about how a dialogue might unfold between people. So rather than just thinking about what I'm going to say, it's the kind of thing where instead of me talking to you now and you sitting opposite me, not listening, but waiting for your chance to speak, which is very often what happens with people, that's an example of sonic libertarianism. You're not even important enough to listen to. I instead am going to be thinking about my next pithy comeback or the thing that'll silence you forever, right? And so it means that, by the way, this doesn't mean that you don't get to disagree. It doesn't mean you can't have passion, but it means, I'm going to set a standard for respectful, generative debate that will make people come to solutions. here in this thing, in sonic stewardship, people are accountable for what they say. In sonic libertarianism, what I say might be a sword, it might be an arrow flying out, might be a missile. And if you happen to get caught in the chest by any of those things, that's on you. You weren't wearing the right armor. You're too soft. You haven't worked hard enough to be strong. And that's why you've been wounded. But I think this is a place where candor is respected, and challenge and critique are expected, but it's balanced with psychological safety. These are environments for rigorous thinking, right? That's what sonic stewardship is. Whereas sonic libertarianism is, I'm going to fire salvos, and whoever is left alive at the end of it has proved themselves worthy. And those people who are left alive will invariably agree with me. And that's not going to be a constructive way forward. So that's why I love them, because I think if we think about our environment right now, even in Britain, are we in an environment of sonic stewardship, or are we in an environment even politically of sonic libertarianism? I think it's very clearly libertarianism.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And actually, if we seek to improve the standard of relational communication within our organisations, I think it behooves all of us to invest in this new dynamic. And it does require some brave, courageous individual to just say, right, line in the sand, that was what got us here. This is a new style of communication that requires a deeper, respectful, inclusive level of listening to quite literally articulate the new rules of the new game, because we are so embedded in sonic libertarianism right now. We have to call it out. We have to label it, I think. We have to say, this is where we have ended up without thoughtfulness. We've just arrived here because these things happen, don't they, over time, layers of an onion, just layer upon layer. And this is who we choose to be moving forward. And this is how we must engage with one another. And we won't necessarily get it right on day one, but we will continue to keep showing up and, as Brené Brown would say, and dare greatly in pursuit of this raised level of intentional, reciprocal, mutual communication for shared learning, for shared outcomes, for all manner of improvement.
Yeah, I've got to say, what people don't seem to realize, and I just wrote about this in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder the other day in the States, is this reality that we don't consider that sonic libertarianism as an environmental choice in an organization has an inevitable end to it. And that end is physical violence. It is physical action that acts violently against people. So that could be the culling of certain types of people from an organization. For example, that may not sound like physical violence, but if your job is gone in an environment that is not stable, that's violence against an entire family, right? Especially if it's not happened for a good cause. But that's the thing. Sonic libertarianism allows what they call discursive violence, which is something I think is really cool as a concept. Again, not mine. But that kind of speak whenever, however type of environment where people say things to others that are bound to hurt, that stereotype, that denigrate, that's discursive violence. And discursive violence leads inevitably to other kinds of violence. And this is not about justifying what happened with Charlie Kirk, but he was a part of the manufacture of discursive violence. The things he said did hurt women, minorities, other groups of people out there. Indeed, he called for violence against other people, which is a part of discursive violence too. But that can't exist in an area, in an environment of sonic stewardship, because the stewardship requires accountability. It would require anybody who thought about, we've all done it in front of our partners, perhaps. We've said something that even as it leaves our mouths, we regret it because it was sent as a weapon. It was sent as a weapon. And what we forget is that we can't unsend it. The bell once rung, it can't be unrung. And sonic libertarian allows for these silos, these volleys of violence to come out verbally all the time, meaning that there's unintended consequences everywhere. And that's why I think sonic stewardship is such a demand for us now to think, ooh, I'm going to think a second because I'm really mad right now and I really would rather say this, or And instead, I'm going to say this. Perhaps that you as comms people would know better than me even. But to me, I think some of the things that workplaces have been saying around return to the office mandates is discursive violence. The threat to you, because, it could have been said better, right? It's a bit of stewardship. There are lots of people with really reasonable reasons why they want to be working from home or have some flexibility that aren't about not wanting to work hard, that are just about other things. And I don't think that's been taken into consideration.
I have been listening, John, to you and Kat chat with great intent, shall I say, in your words, of the way that you do things. And I think that so much of what you said is correct. I don't know how we change that pendulum as well from that talking about that sonic place, because it feels like it's just going worse and worse. Sitting here running in a body for communication, I've never felt so scared to communicate. When I know my intention is good or that I'm not being heard, and I worry sometimes that the transactionality of communication and the words and therefore the way it's going and the loss of tone, the loss of context, the loss of humanity means that it's just forever perpetuating that.
It doesn't have to be, though.
No, absolutely.
It really resonates with me, Jen, because I feel the same way sometimes. It's like, what the hell am I supposed to do?
You can't get it right.
How am I supposed to change all this?
Mm-hmm.
But fundamentally, there are things that we can do about this. And it's going to be uncomfortable because it does mean addressing ourselves first, right? So we can think about the fact that all of us have the ability to weaponize our words, because we're all, especially people who work in comms, you are really dangerous because your craft is honing words, right? I write books. My craft is honing words. So yeah, occasionally when irritated, when the kind of veil of our self-expression is kind of torn a little bit, we might get a bit discursively violent. So instead we say, all right, we're going to spot the warning signs of that say anything culture in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to learn to apologize.
Powerful thing. It's a simple human innate thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And those types of things can make a difference. We can keep the harmful words inside our head.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the advice that they give executives of writing an email, don't put anything in the to box, but just write it and then don't send it. We can actually do that inside our heads if we want. You know, we can think, oh, Jen, I'm going to, and do it in our head. And then when I meet you, I say, look, I'm really disappointed in XYZ. That conversation, instead of, I hate you, you tried to hurt me. That's what we can do. I know it's small, but we can do it.
I totally agree. And I feel like defenses are so high. And I think even before we've received that email that we've misinterpreted or that communication, we believe everyone's going to attack us. I feel like everything, and it goes back to the word that you talked about earlier, and I think you talk a lot about in your book as well, safety. Everything feels really unsafe. And when I mean that, I mean words feel unsafe, language feels unsafe. I mean, the environment feels unsafe, business feels unsafe, winning feels unsafe, and how you get there. And I think that, as you say, we need to practice and do. And I'd hope as a communication professionals, that's something that we can truly role model. Going into sort of the topic of leadership communication, which is clearly something you really delve into in the book as well, and I read a bit about. It seems, which is obviously close to the many hearts, but we also have a lot of discourse in our own community about what is good leadership communication. So that's a challenge in itself as well. But I'm going to quote a couple of things from your book as well. I just want to get your reactions to them, if that's all right. When we talk about how to improve communication skills, you say one thing here, you say, true eloquence in speech and word is precision and intentionality in communication, not orientation. And the second thing you say is, eloquence is a form of generosity in communication that provides clarity, insight, and understanding to others. It requires effort, and not just in choosing precisely the right kind and number of words to use in any exchange, but also in understanding your audience. There's so much to take from that. I think words of so careful, they're usually so carefully thought about, but also more so as well, your audience. And I sometimes worry that we think as a leader, our audience is ourselves, not the people we're trying to get across to. What do you think really in terms of how can we move leaders in this communication style or change or words or intentionality, as you talk a lot about?
I think in comms that there's a list of words that we like to use because they are simple, banal, and defensible. And I think authentic communication requires including that list perhaps, but moving beyond that list. So there are things that are practically unsafe to do in this environment. I've been going for an O1A visa in America And so I have to be very careful about the words that I use about America, for example, almost to a point that feels hard and a little embarrassing for me, to not be able to comment or speak. Inside organizations, there will be some things that are taboo to talk about, and it would be reckless for anybody to suggest that they do. But there's a wealth of other words out there, and there's a wealth of other approaches and tones that we can use that could be more generous, as I say, that would suggest that you do actually know your audience. And that's the surprising part, right? Because oftentimes in comms within organizations, we do know our audience, right? We know what a third year in the organization looks like. We know broadly what universities they've gone to because of the narrowness of our recruitment for the most part. We know what partners their sentiment is and what their major concerns are and the things they're sending their kid off. If they're a junior partner or a young partner, they're sending off their kids to university, and it's probably Russell Group because that's probably the pathway they think they should have gone. And so there's huge expenses. You know what their worries and priorities are. So we do know people. And so why don't we tailor the message to the people around us, to knowing exactly how it'll land? Talking about austerity in an organization or during a transformation will hit very differently for a partner who's sending their second kid to university than it will to a kid who's already sharing a house in zone 7 with 6 other people. But it'll be impactful to both of them. And we can be empathetic about that. I think there's a penchant for not telling the truth in the most transparently obvious way possible, and using words that hide, even the word I just used, right? And I used it somewhat ironically, but the word transformation. Somebody's going to lose their job, right? So people think by saying transformation, we've saved people pain, but all we've done is say that somebody's going to lose their job without saying who and when. And I'm actually working with the company right now about working with their managers about how can they manage the run-up to an actual transformation. It hasn't happened, but people know it's coming. And they know it's a transformation, and it's an IT transformation, including AI, which equals jobs, offshoring, outsourcing, or AI replacement of some description. How are you going to talk about that in a way that can reassure and allow people to function as optimally as possible within the constraints of the information you can offer them? That can be done. Even teaching leaders to say, look, I don't have all the information for you right now. I wouldn't be able to tell you all the information if I had it, but I don't have all the information right now. Here's what I can tell you. I have this comms technique we call the lighthouse and the torch. The idea of looking into I don't think it's in this book, it's in the last one, I think, but the idea that what people require in times of disruption is that you imagine a different scenario. Imagine disruption and transformation is your entire team is stood on the edge of the White Cliffs of Dover, because most people can imagine that, right? But there's just a huge dense forest on the top of the White Cliffs. It's nighttime and there's fog, deep, thick pea soup fog. So now everybody knows that somewhere on one side, because they're a bit turned around, because that's what happens in transformation and with lack of transparency, aka darkness, they're a bit turned around. They know that on one side of them, there is crashing death. They're going to drop off a cliff. And then even for those who are really skilled and can walk, if they move too fast, there's a tree in front of them somewhere that they can't see. So if they run too fast, they're going to hit their head, bounce, bounce, bounce. And so the people wonder, why does everybody get slow during times of fear and anxiety and change? That's why. You may be so expert at it because you've done it 1,000 times, you can peek your head above. But what you need in comms parlance is a lighthouse in the distance, a message that flashes across their face and illuminates the ground around them and lets them realize, if I keep walking in that direction, I will not fall off the cliff. Primary death challenge. Right? What's going to keep you employed here longest is doing this stuff. And then the second thing is, even then I can't move at pace because there could be a tree. So what you need is more messages than most leaders are comfortable delivering, more regularly than most leaders deliver them, saying, here's the next few days, here's the next week before you hit a tree, allowing people to move at pace before they then adjust and move at pace. And that's what they need from us as leaders. They need us to communicate with that kind of regularity. It's mundane and dull for us. We often think we can't find the time for it. But if you want your people to move at pace, that's what they require.
I couldn't agree more. And there's so much you said that resonates with me. We've been doing a lot of work and I've been having quite a few conversations. And I know Kat has as well of late. And you've references in what you just talked about, this whole AI and transformative piece. But actually, basically, most of the working population, I've got no idea what this means to me. I've got no idea where I'm supposed to be going. I've no idea how I should upskill or reskill. There's nobody that's giving me, yes, a future, but also a step-by-step path of how we navigate that. And it feels like we're not having adult to adult, honest to honest, truth to truth conversations. And in times of uncertainty, I think just knowing the honesty of something, even though if you can't control it, it feels like you're closer to it. It's just a human thing, right? You can grasp something in that regard. And I think that where we've got to as well with leadership communication, we as professionals and comms practitioners can feel that, but there seems to still be a pushback of we've got to keep everything hidden, or we've got to keep everything under the surface, or we've got to not put it this way. Whereas literally the working population is screaming, just tell me honestly, tell me authentically. And even if you don't know, just give me a pathway to follow. And I worry that, and I think this also reflects on we become such a short-termism and such a short-termism. Actually, we're not winning because we're sitting on failed promises, misgivings, distruths, or we actually haven't set people up for success because we haven't given them the path to follow.
Yeah. Unfortunately, many of those things are right. There's also a perhaps even more mundane answer, which is that lots of people find it a bit icky to tell people difficult things, to have what people mistakenly, I think, call difficult conversations, because they're not difficult. You have the words, you have the capability, you simply don't want to have the conversation. It's like telling somebody that they're underperforming. It's not a difficult conversation. It's just you'd rather not have it. You don't want the emotionality of it. You don't want to have to really compose your thoughts well and do it diligently. Which is why telling people they're doing well is easier, right? Yeah, well, you're doing fine. You're doing fine. And so we have these people who think they're doing fine until they're not, right? And the same with transformation. We've got a bunch of people who just don't want to have these conversations because they feel like they're difficult. And another bunch of them who thinks if I can not say anything, the people who might be casualties of this transformation. But you just said, and you are right, uncertainty and fear has never been something that produces high performance. Knowing where you're heading for, knowing what the consequences will be, giving yourself a chance to find alternatives, whether that's alternative employment or upskilling or something else. All of these things have better dividends than saying, no, you'll be fine. Honestly, Jen, your job's fine. Everything's fine. And then all of a sudden, well, thanks for your service, Jen.
I was just to say, I think there's something in here that I think is really, really interesting. So in the early part of my career, I worked in staffing and recruitment in the mobile telecommunications arena. And I was very lucky to have helped staff many of the European startup mobile operators. And most of those mobile networks were built using contract staff. So they were never, ever parachuted in ad infinitum. They were always parachuted in with an end date and an end goal. And what I find is quite fascinating, my experience I learned early on, is if you are open and honest and transparent with people about endings, they respond to it really, really well because there's nothing to doubt. There's no ambiguity. You are hired and you are employed up to this date. There may be an extension for you, but we don't know that. So let's just focus on doing whatever we're going to do up until this date. It's that ambiguity, this idea that things will last forever. If you look back a decade, I think it was a decade ago that Reid Hoffman wrote that book. Can't even remember the title of it, but he wrote about the future of work becoming, and I don't like to militarize work either, but let's just go with that for the moment. He wrote about the future of work being tours of duty, where people would come in, fulfill an assignment, a scope of work, and either stand down or enter a discussion about a redeployment for another tour of duty. The fact that we don't talk about endings is actually severely damaging, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit like we don't talk about death and dying. We don't talk about anything that, to your point, John, is uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very poignant analogy, the idea that people who don't talk about their own death, they set themselves up for real pain, and not just for them, but for loved ones, family members, etc. But the same is true here in that one of the rationales that many people have for not talking about death is they don't want to bring it on. And by talking about it, they bring it on. If I'm talking about my funeral, I'm planning for my death. That means my death will be more present. That is not real and it's not true, but it is a part of the human condition that we think in aberrant ways from time to time. But what's the excuse then for workplaces? Oh, I don't want to talk to people about the inevitability of significant change in their teams, including them not being with the team anymore or having to radically change their skills in order to stay. And I just won't talk about it because then it won't happen. Or it's craziness. So we have to become better at having these conversations, but also it's extraordinarily unkind not to. Again, all of you comms people who've been a part of writing values for your companies, where in your company's values is cruelty? Where in your company values is the preservation or the prioritization of personal comfort over organizational ethics? To me, these are the things that reveal an organization. And it's so simple to learn how to tell people that there is going to be significant change, that change will impact them in ways that neither you nor they will like. Because most of us don't revel in seeing people who've worked really hard to find themselves in a certain spot suddenly diminished in their importance because of technology or offshoring or some other mechanism. None of us like that. But being able to have that conversation and have it early to say, hey, it looks to me like there's a radical change happening in our sector, and we're going to respond to it in a couple of different ways. And the way to secure yourself around this is not to say that this conversation protects you, but the way to secure yourself best is to think about some of these changes. That's a generous and kind conversation, even as you might find it a bit difficult because you are telling them about a future that might not be optimal.
It's a decency, isn't it? It's a care.
Yeah.
I sometimes struggle with the concept as well as leaders, and I try who I am in my personal life as a human being and who I am in work life. I worry if I say that to my friend or I have that conversation with family or that, and I think very much about their reaction. I'm like, but it's honest. And then why can't we have that sense of, like, I'm going to have a really tough, well, we're just going to present this in you and I'm going to treat you like I respect anybody that I feel for. Because I just feel like decency and humanity and just general care is so easy to achieve.
It is simple, but energy expensive. That's the problem. So it's also the darkness that we have to face, right? The idea that half the reason that people don't do this is actually just it feels like a bit too much hard work for the people in question. Wouldn't necessarily be too much work for their niece or their nephew or their son or their daughter or their partner or their family member, but it is too much effort for this 19-year-old graduate who's invested their whole world in joining your company for the last 5 years. I would also say that the other stuff you're talking about, decency and care and fairness, these are not high-level value stuff. They are very much related to performance. And it's, again, this is not my work. The Edelman Company, they do that trust index every year where trust sits at the sweet spot of trust, sits at the intersection of technical excellence and care and fairness, right? So ethics in an organizational sense, but care and fairness on an individual sense. So any leader who wants their team to trust them can't just rely on being amazing. Oh yeah, I'm an engineering genius. Well, that's great. That's not going to be enough for trust. It is necessary, but not sufficient. You need that other axis of care, fair, ethics. And if you can provide those, people will trust you, and trust is a settling force for people in disruptive times.
Absolutely. And I could talk to you, John, for hours and hours and hours and just vehemently nod and all the things that you're talking about. And I think trust is a really important space. And obviously for the world of internal communicators and our listeners and members and all those that are in this space as well, is that we're trying to move. Remember, we can be people that can help be guardians of that and sustain of that through the way that we support and coach and others. And that is really the future of our work. Because, and we know from the own research that we do that by helping coach leaders and others to communicate with that care, with that inspiration, with that belief, but also with that honesty and that adulthood and that sense of clarity will make enduring and high-performing organizations. It's not fluff and muster. It is, as you say, let's not confuse this with, we need to be caring. No, we need organizations to win and to grow and to be resilient. That's what we're in the business of. But inevitably, as always, with AI that we've just talked about, jobs will be reshaped. Communication jobs are being reshaped, sometimes for the good, because I think it will bring back some areas that perhaps can make a transformative difference. But as you contemplate that future, John, what would be your one, it's hard because there's plenty in there, but that one piece of advice you would have for internal communicators who contemplate the risks and opportunities that lie ahead?
We have used stories to communicate our thoughts and feelings and intentions, to pass down our culture and identities since our ancestors wrote on cave walls with berry juice. There is nothing about that changes with technology. And at this stage, there isn't close to being anything that can write in a way that will resonate with human beings in that way. Mm. This is not to say our jobs as communicators are safe. It is simply that there is a way to incorporate technology with us. But we are the ones who can look at another human being and without having to seek all their background and a large language model's worth of insight to them, we can say, this is what I want for you to feel. This is what I want for you to understand, not just know, but understand. This is the wisdom I want to generate in your brain based on what I'm saying here. This is the clarity in this darkness that I want to create. This is what words do. This is what eloquence is at its best in communication. The ability to transmit your thoughts, your feelings, your intentions from your brain to another's with the least chance of misinterpretation. That is a field to be cherished. That is a role to be respected. We need to help leaders to understand that we can help educate them on how to do their job better, how to speak better, how to communicate more effectively. And we need to remember that we have a responsibility too in these difficult times to not allow ourselves to be corrupted. There is, if you look back in ancient times, before even medieval, it was women mostly, for the reasons that we all know, but women who learned how to use words effectively, they were called witches. Mm-hmm. And their words were called spells, because we've recognized since even those Middle Ages that when people construct words well, even from a surprising source, you can create change that feels magical for other people. That's what we are at our best.
I love that. And I love that we've ended on it's not magic, but it is magical when you do it well. I love that, John. There's so much to take. Kat, I don't know if you wanted to close off, but I think that we could be here forever. But John, thank you so much. And I think our listeners have got so much to take from the conversation that we've just had. And we encourage them all to get on the list and order your book.
Yes.
Thank you.
Echo that. Heartfelt thanks. Thank you for joining us. And I hope that everybody that listens to this episode takes something magical from it.
I really appreciate it. I hope so too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening today. If you like what you've heard, please like and follow us wherever you access your podcasts.